Three runaway slave children stumble into the isolated mountain valley of Ezra Blackwood, a bitter woodsman who has spent 5 years drowning his grief in whiskey after losing his wife and daughter in a cabin fire. Among the children is 12-year-old Silence, a deaf black girl whose fierce determination reminds Ezra painfully of his lost daughter, along with her two protective brothers who distrust all white men. When notorious bounty hunters arrive offering $500 for their capture, Ezra faces an impossible choice between his self-imposed isolation and protecting the family his late wife died trying to save. The man who was too drunk to save his own children must now decide if these strangers are worth dying for. Snow fell like ash across the valley. Ezra Blackwood stood over 3 small graves, rifle trembling in his weathered hands. Behind him, his cabin burned against the gray dawn sky. The deaf girl lay motionless in the snow. Blood darkened her temple. Her 2 brothers knelt beside her, hands moving in desperate signs he had learned to read. Wake up, wake up. Through the trees, shadows moved. Boots crunched on frozen ground. The bounty hunters had found them. Ezra's finger found the trigger. The metal was cold as winter itself. His choice stood before him like a cliff edge. Pull the trigger on the men approaching through the pines, or surrender the children who had somehow become his world. The rifle wavered. His breath clouded the air. Everything had led to this moment. 3 months earlier, Ezra had lived alone in this same valley. His cabin walls bore carved tallies, 1,827 days since the fire that took Sarah and Emma, 1,827 nights of whiskey and silence. He spoke only to his horse. The animal never answered back. That morning had started like any other, coffee black as tar, bacon burned at the edges, the bottle waiting on the shelf like an old friend. Then they came. 3 shapes stumbled through the tree line. Children, exhausted. The oldest boy, maybe 16, carrying a rifle with no ammunition. The youngest couldn't be more than 8, clutching a wooden toy carved in the shape of a horse. Between them walked a girl. She moved with Emma's stubborn grace. Same age, same fierce eyes that missed nothing. But when Ezra called out, she didn't turn. The oldest boy raised his empty rifle. His hands shook from cold and fear. Ezra stepped onto his porch. The boards creaked under his boots. You lost? The boy's eyes darted between Ezra and the tree line behind them. Someone was coming. Someone they feared more than a stranger with a loaded gun. We're looking for Sarah Blackwood, the boy said. The name hit Ezra like a fist to the chest. Sarah. His Sarah. Dead 5 years now. Ain't nobody here by that name. The girl stepped forward. Her hands moved in quick, sharp gestures. The oldest boy watched her signs, then looked back at Ezra. She says you're lying. Ezra studied the girl's face. Emma would have been just as bold at 12, just as certain of her own judgment. Sarah Blackwood died in a fire, Ezra said, 5 years back. The girl's hands stilled. The youngest boy started to cry, silent tears freezing on his cheeks. She was helping folks like us, the oldest boy said, giving them safe passage north. Ezra's world tilted. Sarah helping runaway slaves. Sarah keeping secrets from her own husband. I don't know nothing about that. But even as he said it, he remembered. The extra food that went missing from their stores. Sarah's late night walks. The way she'd grown distant in those final months. The girl pulled something from beneath her coat, a locket on a thin chain. She opened it with trembling fingers and held it toward Ezra. Sarah's face smiled back at him from the tiny photograph. His knees nearly buckled. Sarah's locket, the one that had burned with everything else in the fire. Except it hadn't burned. It had found its way to this child who stood in his yard like a ghost from his past. Where did you get that? The girl's hands moved again. The oldest boy translated. She says a woman gave it to her. Told her if she ever got in trouble to find Sarah Blackwood in the Colorado mountains. Ezra's chest tightened. How many others had Sarah helped? How many secrets had she carried? A gunshot echoed across the valley, distant but getting closer. The oldest boy grabbed his siblings. "We have to go." "Wait." The word came out before Ezra could stop it. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on him, hope and desperation mixed in equal measure. He thought of Sarah, of the woman who had shared his bed and kept her conscience from him, of Emma, who would have welcomed these children without question. He thought of 1,827 days of counting grief instead of living. "Get inside." The cabin felt smaller with 4 people in it. The children huddled near the cold fireplace while Ezra lit the kindling. None of them had eaten recently. He could see it in their hollow cheeks, their careful movements. He opened a can of beans, set out the last of his bread. The girl watched him with Sarah's eyes. When he placed the food before her, she signed something to her brothers. "She says thank you," the oldest boy said. "What are your names?" "I'm Moses. This is little Samuel. She's—" Moses paused, his hands moving. The girl signed back. "She says to call her Silence." Ezra ladled beans into 4 bowls. "How long you been running?" 2 weeks, maybe more." "Who's chasing you?" Moses's jaw tightened. "Caleb Marsh. He tracks runaways for money." Ezra had heard of Marsh, a man who took pride in his work, who never gave up a trail once he found it. "He's good at what he does," Ezra said. "Good enough to find us here?" Ezra looked at the 3 children eating his food by his fire, in his cabin where Sarah had once lived and Emma had once laughed. "Yeah, he'll find you." Silence set down her spoon. Her hands moved rapidly. "She wants to know if you're going to turn us in," Moses said. The question hung in the air like smoke. Outside, another gunshot echoed, closer this time. Ezra walked to the window. 3 riders moved along the ridge line. They had dogs with them. The hunt was closing in. He turned, back to the children. Moses held his empty rifle like it might protect them. Little Samuel clutched his wooden horse. Silence watched Ezra with eyes that had seen too much. These weren't his children, not his responsibility, not his fight. But Sarah's locket caught the firelight around the girl's neck. Sarah, who had died keeping secrets for people like them. Sarah, who had been a better person than her drunk husband ever deserved. Ezra walked to his gun cabinet, pulled out his rifle and a box of ammunition. "You know how to shoot?" he asked Moses. The boy nodded. "Then you better learn to do it right." Outside, the riders had reached the valley floor. Their voices carried on the wind. They were asking questions in town, offering money for information. It wouldn't be long now. Ezra loaded his rifle with steady hands. For the first time in 1,827 days, he had something worth fighting for. The fire crackled in the hearth. The children ate in silence. Snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the growing darkness, Caleb Marsh was coming for them all. Dawn brought news from town. Caleb Marsh had arrived with $500 and questions. The storekeeper's wife had seen 3 children matching their description. The blacksmith remembered Moses asking about safe passage north. Money changed, hands, tongues loosened. The net was closing. Ezra watched the children sleep by his dying fire. Little Samuel curled around his wooden horse. Moses kept one hand on his rifle even in dreams. Silence lay between them, Sarah's locket rising and falling with each breath. He should have turned them away at first sight. Instead, he found himself teaching them to survive. The forest became their classroom. Ezra showed Moses how to track game by broken twigs and disturbed earth, how to read weather in the color of morning sky, how to move through undergrowth without sound. Moses learned quickly. His distrust of Ezra softened into grudging respect. When Ezra handed him real ammunition, the boy's eyes widened. "You sure about this?" Ezra nodded toward the targets he'd carved into distant trees. "Show me what you can do." The rifle cracked. Bark exploded from the center ring. "Good, do it again." Little Samuel proved gifted with his hands. He watched Ezra whittle kindling and mimicked every movement. Soon his small fingers were shaping wood with surprising skill. Ezra found himself carving again. Simple things at first. A whistle for the boy, a handle for Moses's knife. His hands remembered the motions. Sarah used to say he could make wood sing. That was before the bottle became his only companion. Silence moved through the forest like water. Her deafness made her eyes sharp, her instincts keen. She spotted deer before Ezra heard them coming, noticed broken branches that others missed, read the forest language in ways that sound never could. She reminded him of Emma, not just in looks, but in the stubborn set of her shoulders, the way she refused help until she truly needed it. Emma had been the same way, independent from the moment she could walk. The memory hit him like winter wind. Emma standing in their doorway on her 6th birthday, hands on her hips, chin raised in defiance. "I don't need you to walk me to school, Papa. I know the way." Sarah laughing behind her coffee cup. "She's got your pride, Ezra." His pride? What good had it done them? Silence touched his arm. Her hands moved in quick gestures. He was learning their improvised sign language, pieced together from necessity and love. "She's asking if you're sad." Moses translated. Ezra looked into eyes that held wisdom beyond 12 years, eyes that had seen masters and overseers and worse things than a drunk father. Sometimes. Her hands moved again. Moses hesitated before speaking. "She says you don't have to be sad alone anymore." Something cracked inside Ezra's chest. A wall he'd built, from guilt and whiskey and 1,827 days of self-imposed exile. He nodded once. It was all he could manage. That night, by firelight, Silence began calling him something new. Her hands formed the same signs over and over, directed at him with shy hope. "What's she saying?" Moses's voice was soft. "Papa." The word hit Ezra like a physical blow. Papa. The name Emma had whispered in her sleep. The title he'd forfeited, the night he chose whiskey over watching the fire. He couldn't breathe. Silence saw his reaction and started to pull her hands back. Ezra caught them gently in his own weathered palms. He nodded. Once. Enough. Her smile could have melted winter. But winter was far from over. 3 days later, smoke rose from the direction of town, black and thick against the pale sky. Moses spotted it first from their lookout point above the valley. "That's not cook-fire smoke," he said. Ezra pulled out his spyglass. Through the lens he could make out shapes moving through the streets, men on horseback, dogs straining at leashes. "They're searching house to house. Looking for us? Looking for anyone who might be hiding you." That night flames danced on the horizon. Someone had paid for their silence with more than money. Ezra made his decision before dawn. He woke the children quietly, packed what supplies they could carry, left everything else behind. The cabin that had been his prison for 5 years. The graves he'd visited every morning. The bottle that had been his only constant companion. All of it abandoned for 3 strangers who had become something more precious than his own life. They moved before sunrise, following game trails deeper into the mountains. Ezra led them away from civilization, away from safety, toward the high country where winter ruled with iron fists. Behind them, smoke continued to rise from town. Ahead lay wilderness that killed the unprepared. But for the first time since Sarah and Emma died, Ezra felt something besides guilt driving his steps. He felt purpose. The trail climbed steadily. Little Samuel tired first but never complained. Moses carried him when the boy's legs gave out. Silence ranged ahead and behind, watching for signs of pursuit. They were a family now, bound not by blood but by choice. By evening they'd gained 1,000 feet in elevation. The air thinned, their breath came in white puffs. Stars emerged sharp and cold overhead. Ezra built a small fire in the shelter of overhanging rock. They ate beans from cans and shared water from his flask. Silence sat beside him as the others slept. Her hands moved in the firelight. "She's asking about your real daughter," Moses translated drowsily. Ezra stared into the flames. Emma's face danced there, laughing at some joke only 6-year-olds understood. "Her name was Emma. She died when I wasn't watching." More signs from silence. "She says you're watching now." Ezra looked at the 3 children sleeping by his fire. Moses with his protective instincts, little Samuel with his gentle heart, Silence with her fierce spirit that reminded him why some things were worth fighting for. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm watching now." Wind howled through the peaks above them. In the distance, something that might have been wolves called to the moon, or it might have been Caleb Marsh's dogs, following their scent through the darkness. Either way, morning would bring new dangers. But tonight, by firelight in the thin mountain air, Ezra Blackwood was a father again, and that was worth any price the dawn might demand. The blizzard struck without warning. One moment they were picking their way along a narrow ridge. The next, they were swallowed by white fury that turned the world into howling nothing. Ezra lost sight of the children in seconds. Wind tore his voice away before it could reach them. Snow whipped horizontal, stinging like thrown gravel. He groped forward, one hand extended until his fingers found Moses's coat. The boy had little Samuel pressed against his chest, shielding him from the worst of it. Silence clung to Moses's free arm, her face buried against his shoulder. They needed shelter. Now. Ezra remembered stories from old prospectors, tales of mines honeycombing these mountains like termite holes. Most were played out, abandoned when the gold ran thin. He led them upward, feeling for the telltale depression that might signal a cave or tunnel. The cold bit through their clothes. Little Samuel had stopped shivering, which meant his body was shutting down. Ezra's hand struck timber, a support beam, weathered but solid. Beyond it, darkness opened like a mouth. He guided them inside. The mine shaft stretched back into black silence. Old rail tracks disappeared into shadows. But it was dry, protected. The wind's howl faded to a distant moan. Ezra built a fire from scraps of old lumber. The flames threw dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls. Moses rubbed warmth back into little Samuel's blue fingers. Silence explored the tunnel's entrance, running her hands along familiar timber joints. Her signs were sharp, urgent. "She recognizes this place," Moses said. Ezra studied the girl's face. Recognition mixed with something else. Memory. Pain. How could she know it? More signs from silence. Moses translated haltingly. "She says her mama worked in a mine like this before. Before slavery, before everything went wrong." Ezra moved deeper into the tunnel. His torch revealed initials carved into support beams, dates from the early 50s, names of men who'd come here chasing dreams and finding mostly rock. Then he saw them. Letters carved with careful precision into a beam near what had once been the mine office. E+S. A heart drawn around them with the tip of a knife. His torch nearly slipped from numb fingers. Ezra and Sarah, their initials, their secret. This was the mine where they'd planned to build their life. Before the cabin. Before Emma. Before everything collapsed into grief and whiskey. He'd forgotten. Buried the memory so deep it might as well have been fiction. But Sarah had remembered. Even at the end, she'd remembered their beginning. A leather journal lay wedged behind the beam, water-stained, but intact. Sarah's careful handwriting filled page after page. Ezra's hands shook as he read by torchlight. Entry after entry chronicled her secret work. Names of people she'd helped, routes through the mountains, safe houses scattered across 3 territories, and other things, private things, her fears about his drinking, her plans to take Emma somewhere safe, her discovery that she carried their second child, a child he'd never known existed. The journal's final entry was dated 3 days before the fire. "I can't protect Emma from what Ezra's becoming. The bottle has him now. I see it in his eyes when he looks at her. Not love anymore. just guilt that she exists to witness his shame. We'll leave after her birthday. Go north where the air is clean and men don't solve their problems by drowning them. Maybe someday he'll forgive me. Maybe someday he'll forgive himself. Ezra's vision blurred. The journal slipped from his hands and fell closed. Sarah had been packing to leave him the night she died. Not running errands. Not visiting friends. Packing. She'd stayed up late gathering their daughter's things by lamplight. When the fire started, she'd been trapped by her own preparations for escape. He'd killed them. Not through neglect or drunken absence, but through the slow poison of becoming someone his wife couldn't trust with their child's safety. The truth hit him like a cave-in. Complete. Crushing. Final. He'd spent 5 years mourning his failure to save them. He should have been mourning his role in destroying them. Silence found him there, crumpled beside Sarah's journal. Her small hand touched his shoulder. When he looked up, tears had carved tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. Her signs were gentle. Moses knelt beside them to translate. She says Mama used to cry too, at night when she thought nobody could see. More signs. She says crying don't make you weak, makes you remember what's worth protecting. Ezra studied the girl's face. 12 years old and wiser than men twice her age, she'd lost more than he ever had, yet somehow found strength to comfort a broken stranger. Why are you helping me? Her hands moved with careful precision. Because you helped us first. Because Papa means Papa no matter what came before. The words broke something loose inside his chest, a dam of guilt and self-hatred that had held for 5 years. He pulled, silence close. She let him hold her while the storm raged outside and the fire burned low. Moses and little Samuel slept curled together like puppies. The mine protected them from wind and cold, but morning would bring new dangers. Caleb Marsh wouldn't stop, for weather. Men like him never stopped. A sound echoed from the tunnel mouth. Footsteps on stone. Voices calling through the storm. Ezra grabbed his rifle. Moses was already awake, his own weapon ready. 3 shapes appeared at the tunnel entrance. Marsh and 2 of his men. Ice crusted on their beards. Well now, Marsh said. Looks like we found ourselves a family reunion. Moses's rifle cracked. The shot went wide in the dim light, but it drove the men back outside. You got nowhere to run, old man, Marsh called. Storm's got us all trapped till morning. Might as well make this easy. Ezra checked his ammunition. 6 rounds left. Not enough for a sustained fight, but enough for what needed doing. Moses, take the children deeper into the mine. Find another way out. What about you? Ezra looked at Sarah's journal, still open beside the dying fire. At the initials carved in timber. At the 3 children who'd given him back his reason for living. I'll buy you time. Another shot from outside. The bullet sparked off stone near Ezra's head. Moses gathered little Samuel in silence. They disappeared, into the tunnel's dark throat. Ezra was alone with his choices. His rifle. His guilt. And for the first time in 5 years, his clarity. The storm howled outside like all the demons he'd carried. But inside the mine where he'd once carved his initials beside the woman he'd failed, Ezra Blackwood finally understood what Sarah had known all along. Some things were worth dying for. Some things were worth living for. The children's footsteps faded into darkness. Caleb Marsh called his name from the storm. Ezra Blackwood stepped toward the light. The storm cleared by dawn. Ezra led the children back through snow that sparkled like broken glass. The valley opened below them, familiar and foreign at the same time. His cabin still stood where he'd left it. The graves still waited beneath their burden of snow. But everything had changed in the 3 days since they'd fled into the mountains. Moses moved stiffly. The bullet that had grazed his shoulder in, the mine had festered during their cold flight. Fever burned in his eyes. Little Samuel supported his brother as they stumbled down the final slope. Silence ranged ahead, checking for signs of pursuit. Her movements were sharp, efficient. The mine had changed her too. She carried herself like someone who'd seen the price of survival. Ezra had made his choice in that tunnel. Not the desperate gamble of a guilty man seeking redemption. Something cleaner. The quiet decision of a father protecting his children. They reached the cabin as the sun touched the eastern peaks. Ezra pushed open the door to rooms that felt like memories of another man's life. The bottle still sat on the shelf where he'd left it. Dust motes danced in morning light that fell across empty spaces where his family had once moved and laughed and lived. Moses collapsed into a chair by the cold fireplace. His wound had opened during the descent. Blood seeped through his shirt. "We need to clean that," Ezra said. "No time." Moses's voice was tight with pain. "They'll follow our trail down the mountain." Ezra looked out the window toward the ridge line. Nothing moved against the sky. Yet. "Then we make our stand here." He built a fire while Silence helped little Samuel tend to Moses's wound. The boy had learned field medicine from necessity. His small hands were steady as he cleaned away infection. Moses gripped the chair arms until his knuckles went white, never made a sound. Ezra loaded his rifle with hands that no longer shook. 6 rounds for Marsh and his men. Maybe enough, maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. Silence tugged at his sleeve. Her hands moved in the language they'd built together, from survival and love. "She wants to know about the graves," Moses translated through gritted teeth. Ezra looked toward the 3 mounds outside his window. Sarah, Emma, the child he'd never known. My family, the ones I couldn't save. More signs from Silence. "She says you saved us instead." "Different thing." "Is it?" The question hung between them like smoke from the rekindled fire. Outside, riders appeared on the distant ridge. 3 shapes moving deliberately down the mountain face. Marsh had found their trail. Ezra checked his ammunition one final time. 6 bullets for 3 men. Simple arithmetic that left no room for mercy or second chances. "When they come, you stay down. All of you." Moses struggled to his feet. "I can still fight. You can barely stand. Don't matter. These are my people to protect." Silence moved between them. Her hands spoke urgently. "She says we're all family now. Nobody fights alone." Family. The word had lost its meaning when Sarah and Emma died. These 3 strangers had given it back to him, carved from shared danger and quiet. Trust. The riders reached the valley floor. Marsh in the lead, his face hard as winter stone. Behind him rode 2 men Ezra didn't recognize. Hired killers, probably. Men who tracked human beings for money. They stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Close, enough to talk. Far enough to draw and fire. "Ezra Blackwood," Marsh called. "You got something belongs to me." Ezra stepped onto his porch. The boards creaked under his boots like they had that first day when 3 exhausted children had stumbled into his life. "Don't see how that's possible." $500 says different. These folks are escaped property. Law's on my side. Law's got nothing to do with what's right. Marsh laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. "Right, don't pay my bills, old man. Send them out and I'll make this quick. Keep them and I'll make sure everyone suffers." Behind Ezra, the door opened. Moses appeared, rifle in his good hand. Little Samuel and Silence flanked him, unarmed but steady. A family. Standing together. "That your answer?" Marsh asked. Ezra's finger found his trigger. "That's my answer." Time stretched like a held breath. Wind moved through the pines. Snow fell from heavy branches with soft thuds that sounded like heartbeats. Then Marsh went for his gun. Ezra's rifle cracked. Marsh spun sideways, clutching his shoulder. His horse reared and dumped him in the snow. The other 2 riders drew their weapons. Moses fired despite his wound, the shot going wide. Little Samuel threw himself over, Silence shielding her with his small body. Ezra worked his bolt action. A second shot dropped one of Marsh's men from his saddle. The 3rd rider spurred his horse toward the cabin, pistol raised. No time to reload. Ezra dove sideways as the bullet splintered wood where his head had been. The rider wheeled for another pass. His horse's hooves thundered on frozen ground. That's when Silence moved. She'd been lying still as death in the snow, hidden behind little Samuel's protective form. Now she rolled sideways, scooping up a handful of ice and stones. The rider bore down on her, gun aimed at center mass. Silence threw her makeshift weapon with perfect timing. It struck the horse's eyes, sending the animal into a panic. The rider fought for control as his mount bucked and spun. Moses found his mark on the second try. The man toppled backward, arms windmilling, and hit the ground hard. Silence wasn't unconscious. She'd been playing dead, using the skills her brothers had taught her for surviving impossible situations. The girl who'd reminded him of Emma had just saved all their lives. Marsh crawled toward his fallen pistol, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Ezra walked over and kicked the weapon away. "It's finished," Ezra said. Marsh looked up with eyes full of hatred and pain. "You think this ends it? There'll be others, always others coming for them. Then they'll find me waiting." Spring came early that year. The snow melted in March, revealing green grass and wildflowers that had waited all winter for their moment. Ezra rebuilt his cabin with help from Moses, whose shoulder had healed clean. They added a second room for the children. Little Samuel carved decorations for the door frames, his skill growing with practice. Silence started a school for the deaf children in town. Her improvised sign language became the foundation for something larger, something that gave voice to those who'd been silenced. The bottle still sat on Ezra's shelf. Dust gathered on it like snow on a grave marker. Some mornings he'd look at it and remember the man who'd needed it to sleep. That man felt like a stranger now. The graves outside his window became a place of memory rather than guilt. Sarah, Emma, and the child he'd never known. They were part of him always, but no longer the only part. Moses approached him one evening as he sat on the porch, watching Silence teach sign language to a group of local children. "You think she knows?" Moses asked. "Knows what?" "That she saved you more than you saved her." Ezra watched his daughter laugh soundlessly at something one of the children had signed. Her joy needed no words to be understood. "Maybe we saved each other." Silence turned from her students and caught sight of him watching. Her hands moved in the evening light, forming words that had become as natural as breathing. "Papa, come play." Ezra rose from his chair and walked toward his daughter. Behind him, the cabin waited with warm light spilling from its windows. Inside, little Samuel was probably carving something wonderful. Moses would be reading by the fire, his education growing daily. A family, not born, but chosen. Not perfect, but real. The valley held them all in its quiet embrace as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Ezra reached Silence and knelt to her level. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held him close. He was exactly where he belonged. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.